Hello and welcome to the special edition of the Under Center podcast. I am your host, Daragh, and we are talking about the Seahawks, but I am not alone. I am delighted to be joined by one of the hosts of the Bump and Stacy Show on Seattle Sports Radio. That's, of course, Stacy Jo Rost. Stacy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am not too bad. I'm not too bad. I explained off air. I'm a little tired. It's early over here, or late, whichever way you want to say it, over here in Dublin. But look,
Yep.
when I signed up to be a Seahawks fan, these were one of the terms and conditions I had to make do with. Getting used to Pacific time for sure when it comes to airtime over here. But
Yeah, you only chose the
it's
furthest time zone. You could have been a Giants fan. You know what I mean? It would have been so much easier.
I know, and I always question why, because Ireland has a big, Giants, Patriots, Jets,
Yeah.
Bills,
You
all
have
the East
so
Side
many
sort of.
East Coast teams. Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't until I realized that, oh yeah, Seahawks would exclusively sort of kick off at say 9 p.m., half 9 p.m. over here in Ireland. I'm thinking, oh yeah, I get the second slate of games. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I watch all the
Relax.
first ones.
Yep.
Yeah, but then when it's getting to like midnight, half 12,
Yep. You
anytime
played
Seahawks
yourself.
game finishes, yeah,
Yep.
most people in work on Monday are like,
Yeah.
why you tired every Monday?
Yeah,
Don't
we
know what
went
you're
to
talking about.
overtime.
Yeah.
Exhausted.
uh Actually, speaking of overtime, I have been lucky enough now to go over to Seattle, and I have been able to watch a Seahawks game back in 2019.
Mm.
And that was the game at home to the Bucks. I think it was the DK Metcalf's rookie year. So yeah, they went to overtime in that game. And it's still one of the highlights so far, because I got to see them in London against the Raiders. That was a blowout, but this close
Yep.
one going
Yep.
to overtime that they won
Yep.
was unreal. It was a great one. I was in like the 300s up there, and everyone was having a great time. And I can't wait for the day I get to go back and see
It's
another
always
Seahawks game.
fun asking people about their favorite games because everyone, like some people might be like, oh, the NFC Championship game against Green Bay. Like there are like famous Seahawks games that we all think of, but like one of
Yeah.
my favorite games I've ever covered in person was like this random regular season game against Houston, and I don't think it went into overtime. Excuse me. It was like a Jimmy Graham touchdown with like a couple seconds left or something on fourth down. I don't completely remember, but the stadium like lost their minds, and I don't think it was like a huge game of consequence. It might have been shortly before the trade deadline, maybe when they got Dwayne Brown. But like, it's always like people's favorite game. Sometimes is the most random day that they went there, and they're like, I don't know why, but that's my pick. And I
Yeah.
I always love the different answers.
Oh yeah. I know that. I know the exact game you're talking about, and I think it
Uh
was
huh.
was it. I think it was Deshaun Watson's rookie year, and he was
It
going into
was.
Seattle, and
Yep.
him and Russ just went
Yes, it
blow
was a
for
back and
blow.
forth, and then
Yeah.
Deshaun tore his ACL like the following week, or like that,
Yeah.
in practice or something. Yeah, it was a crazy game.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that game well for sure. But unfortunately, at the moment for the Seahawks, it's not exactly kind of going that way when it comes
Yeah.
to games. But I must mention also we are getting close to the holiday season. And hopefully the Seahawks haven't put a dampener on it for you just yet.
No, no, still,
No.
I got my tree. Still enjoying the holiday season, and they're still in it, and it feels sometimes disingenuous to talk about that on air because the tenor from fans is one of disappointment for the season, and it's completely understandable. And I'm disappointed for how the season has gone, but um, I think you also have to be honest when you talk about the team and be like, well, I can't say the season's over when they're not eliminated, and if they win out, that's a big if after losing four, but like they've got a shot at a wild card. I mean, the Vikings are playing now Mullins over Dobbs. Like they're not in a great spot. Like who knows what the Falcons are going to do. Um, so I mean, they're still in it. It's just not the place we want them to be.
Yeah, and of course, yeah. we're talking Seahawks in general because they did lose their fourth game in a row on Sunday,
Oh,
going down to the San Francisco 49ers for the second time in as many weeks by 28 points to 16. First time the Pete Carroll era that a Seahawks team have lost four in a row. Of course, Stacey, this was the much maligned gauntlet of games the Seahawks fans have marked on their calendars that would prove whether or not they are true contenders. After a 6-3 start, the playoffs seemed like a real possibility, but now the Seahawks are 6-7 on the outside, looking in with the final game, I should say, of this
mm-hmm.
stretch coming on Monday at home to the Eagles, and not many are backing against the four losses in a row, turning into five. Stacey, I caught some of your show yesterday, and a lot of Seahawks were hot. Just to put it mildly, and you asked the question to listeners, what would you do to fix the Seahawks? And there's so many differing views, and that is a kind of indicative of the issues of the team at the
Yeah.
moment. That there is not just one thing to point your finger at; there's a myriad of things.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I'm so glad you said that because after I left that conversation and after the show ended, you start thinking about what you want to do the next day. And I was like, I feel like listeners planned half our show. Like we had people calling in and everything everyone was talking about had merit and it was fair. And like you said, it ran the gamut. It was, I don't think anyone would say the Seahawks lost this game because they had bad offensive or defensive line play. Like Williams was great on the defensive line. The offensive line was not stellar, but like it wasn't their worst performance. I think explosive plays are the reason they lost. However, we had someone call in and say, hey, the trenches are a problem. And I was like, you're absolutely right. Like, you want to talk about how you got to this place and why you're still behind the Eagles and 49ers. The trenches might be the biggest reason. We had people, there were some people I disagreed with. Like, there are some people that still think that DK is a problem. I don't agree with that. I think he's an emotional player. I think that sometimes he needs to, like, check it because it'll get him into trouble like it did with Fred Warner. That wasn't on DK. I mean, DK, fought back, but you start building up a reputation with refs and then you face the consequences. So I didn't agree with every single take, but all of it was fair. And really, to sum it up, it was personnel issues, coaching issues, execution issues, and wrapped up in all of this is a fear about messaging and a fear about what happens when you start to lose four in a row. God forbid they lose five in a row. What if it becomes six in a row? This is uncharted territory for a Pete Carroll team, and it is really not easy, but a more effective venture to have your messaging stick and your culture thrive when you're winning and when everyone's excited and there's a lot of trust in each other. To coach through finger pointing and to coach through frustration is a completely different beast. And so that's where our conversation started going after that. I loved that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, it was, and like you said, I would be in the same boat. There was some points that I would agree with, probably some that I don't, and you're
Mm-hmm.
starting to see when it comes to sort of, you know, this space of um podcasting and radio and sports radio and people giving views that the views can differ um a lot with people. So obviously some
Yeah.
people like that, they point their finger slowly at, say, like that coaching, or they point at upstairs, or they point at ownership, or they point at players and stuff. And it is an interesting sort of conversation, because when you listen to a few of them and you hear their reasoning why they believe this is the problem or they believe that is the problem, um you always have to have a think about it and think they're not wrong at the way they're coming at, but maybe it's not the reason this particular
Yeah.
team is struggling.
Yeah. I would look at that with like the quarterback conversation, right? Like if someone were to come out and say, which they have all season long, Gino's the problem. Gino's just not good enough. Gino is a backup. I think I'd say, like, well, gosh, I mean, the majority of his career, he was a backup. He's shown that he can be a good quarterback, but I wouldn't put him in that top tier of quarterbacks right now. Like, I just wouldn't. I don't think that's a controversial take. That said, I don't think that Gino has been the problem with this team. In fact, I think he's been one of their better performers, which is saying something because he's had regression this year. Um, I think that so again, it's something you could say, and universally for football teams, the most important position is quarterback. So it's a take where you're like, I guess you're not fundamentally wrong. But the issue with the Seahawks isn't that Geno Smith isn't Patrick Mahomes. Like, I don't know if you bring in, a top 5 pick, if you were to just tank, it's too late now. But if you were to tank and you suddenly get, a Caleb Williams and bring him in, does he solve your offensive line problems? Does he solve the explosive plays you're giving up defensively? Does he solve if there are any issues with culture or leadership? I don't think so. Like, I think he can help, but like, I think one thing that has become very clear with this season is you are not one young quarterback away from fixing your problems.
Absolutely. And I think that's though comes from, and I think it ties in with the sort of coaching issue that some people are having as well. That you know the team has had Russ for so long, and there was success, and then there was a towards the end. Obviously, there was a bit of, you know, uh, what could you say, angst? Maybe I think that might be too strong of a
Yeah,
word, but
it
um,
fit.
yeah,
I think it would fit.
but so the Seahawks are in this sort of quarterback carousel, as you could say, at the moment. They've
Hmm.
joined it. They don't have their sort of settled guy, their franchise guy. In a lot of people's eyes now, maybe in coaching's eyes, they do in Gino. And if that's what they want, that's fine, because like you said, Gino's not one of the worst guys in the league this year. You can just have a look at, what's happened in the league with the
Right.
amount of injuries, first of all, that for QBs, and then also the very questionable play as well. And Carolina is a perfect example. If they thought they got the guy in Bryce Young, and he struggled, but we're the very next pick, and CJ Stroud was doing a great job in Houston. You're not guaranteed, like you mentioned, getting a quarterback in a draft is going to fix all those problems. But you know, I was going to actually say this right, but I'll bring it to you there now. That's why I'm tying it into coaching, because we're seeing, you know, not calls for Pete, maybe whispers about maybe
Right.
fans wanting to move on for Pete, sort of getting louder and louder this year. I think it's the first year I've seen so many takes from so many people saying that maybe it's time for Pete to go, or whatever that is. But I don't see it from a point of view is that he's struggling. Well, obviously that's one of the things, but not the main one.
Right.
Because I'm looking at the situation in New England with Bill Belichick, the situation
Right.
in Pittsburgh with Mike Tomlin. These are quite similar in terms of their guys with long tenures with their team, their defensive coaches. The moment the fad is offensive young coaches, and maybe the this time the game, anytime the game changes, it takes a
Hmm.
few victims with it, and maybe Pete, Mike, Bill are those victims at the moment. Where I would err on the side of caution, and where I'd love to get your point of view on this, Stacey, is you know you could try and get this 30-something-year-old, young offensive guy to be your head coach. You could look out. You could get a Mike McDaniel. You could get a Kyle
Hmm.
Shanahan. You could get a Sean McVay. On the other side of things,
A Matt
you could
Patricia.
end up with a Cliff Kingsbury. No disrespect to Cliff
Right. Right.
Kingsbury, but
Right.
just because of how it worked out in the end with Arizona.
He's got a beautiful
But
cement mansion. Like, he's fine.
yeah, yeah, like
It's
that
okay.
picture of him in his house for the draft is always
Yeah.
going to be iconic. Like, but
Yeah.
when it comes to his legacy with the team itself, didn't end great.
Yeah, I love you pointing that out, and it's something that we've kind of talked about and have been delicate with on air, especially given that they are still in the playoff hunt. And you don't want to talk about coaching changes with the team when that team has historically, for the last 13 seasons, been a playoff team far more often than not. Um, and when there are other concerns there. But I think that it is very natural to look at what Shanahan particularly has been able to do with San Francisco. He's still going after that Super Bowl. They may very well get it this year, but there's a monkey on his back too. But um, I think that there is a part of me and many fans that look at just the way that those teams have been innovative. And McVay's had some different stumbles. Losing Gurley kind of changed the DNA of that offense, and he had to learn to adapt without him, because Gurley was kind of like the secret sauce to that Super Bowl Rams team, even though they were seen as this 11 personnel. They throw it all over the yard. Um, so he's had some hurdles that he's had to overcome, but he's also just brilliant. And what Shanahan's done with San Francisco offensively is absolutely amazing. And there is this very natural feeling you get as a Seahawks fan when you have a head coach who's like, this is how I like to do things. And part of my secret sauce to making this work is sticking to it. Like if you start to lose sight of who you are, that's when you lose. And that's when you fail. And that's when you struggle. You have to know who you are and stick to it. And that's kind of the way he approaches team building and coaching. And not a consequence of that, but some fallout from that is when the league starts to change, you feel like he's not. I do think that Carroll has adapted and evolved in his own way. I think a switch in base defense from a 4-3 to a 3-4 was part of that. I think allowing for his coordinators to have a little more autonomy has been part of that. And I think, embracing different roles with safety play has been part of that. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out. Like Jamal Adams hasn't been the game changer that you were hoping he would be. Your defense switched to a 3-4, which is a nice way to try to combat these really innovative passing offenses, but you didn't have the personnel to like put big bodies up front, right? Like there's been little hurdles in the way of some of that innovation or evolution, rather, maybe not innovation. I think that I have a little bit of patience with Pete, which is so ironic because we've been talking about the Mariners all week as well and how patience is running out. And here's a team that's also struggling, that doesn't look like they're going to make the playoffs. And we're like, well, wait a minute. Like, let's see what they can do. But they've earned that. I think you can say that. And, that might make some fans angry, but you do earn a little bit of grace when you've overseen a really successful program. It's the same grace that Tomlin's going to get, the same grace that Belichick is going to get. And so I think the biggest thing I wonder with him is whether that grass is greener. The same thing you said, like, is Jody Allen or ownership, should they move on from Pete after this season or after next season or, further, are you going to luck in and find that guy and hope that you get this really innovative person that can, light a spark and take the league by storm? Because there's a lot of instances where that doesn't happen. And it's like the quarterback conversation we had. Like there are so many like dream scenarios that get texted in all the time. And I don't want to belittle those texts. I just want to say like every other half of those scenarios is one where you get a bust. It's one where you take a Zach Wilson at number 2 instead of a Mahomes at number 10 or wherever he was. Like it's where you get, like you said, you get a Matt Patricia and not a Sean McVay. So there is a fear, a very natural, as a risk-averse person, fear that I have of what happens when you move on. Like this guy's made it work for so long. Like, what if the problem is they just need better offensive linemen, and what if that solves stuff? Or, that's the battle I'm currently having, is whether you're going to see a real improvement with personnel when you have the same decision makers there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's always going to be the tough question, especially like that when you have a head coach that's been there for so long, that has brought so much success to the team. Especially one like Pete, he's brought the team their only Super Bowl. Should have brought home its second Super Bowl as well.
I'll leave it alone, but
it's just a glancing shot. That's it. We're gonna quickly just sort of move on after that. Yeah. But it's so. But then also, if you want to look on the other side of things, is they have brought a Super Bowl, but they haven't looked like they're going back to the Super Bowl since that Super Bowl. So maybe there is time to, and it's kind of ironic that, of course, this is sort of the 10-year anniversary this season of that Super Bowl too, and it kind of makes people reflect also as well, saying, "Oh yeah, what have we done in those last 10 years?" And that's when the calls get louder and stuff. And, that's it. They just should never have reminded anybody that's a 10-year anniversary. If they said nothing, it would have been absolutely fine. But
now people are going to be raging again. They're going to be, and we haven't even been back to a conference championship game.
Exactly. Where's I haven't seen a banner raised in years. What the hell's going on here? Like,
Where's our NBA in-season tourney?
Talk to me about the rushing attack, because
Oh God.
I'm struggling to understand what's going on because um one thing that's frustrates me because actually I didn't get a chance to tell you that this show actually is formed of actually guys that play American football over here in Ireland.
Hmm.
We all play for the same team, so we sort of look at it, and I'm looking to be a coach. So I'm kind of looking at it from my coaching point of view when it comes to first of all, we're going to talk rushing attack, and then defense. But
Hmm.
you look at a guy like Ken Walker and the pace that he has, and the fact that almost never see them come out in an I formation with Gino and shotgun and him and Walker a couple of yards behind him to give Walker that chance to just, a couple of yards to just absolutely, become a bullet and just run
Right.
through that gap, wherever that gap is. Obviously people talk about, bouncing out and not going through the gap, but utilizing that, for me, that's one thing, utilizing, the skills that your players have in terms of like Walker with his pace. Let him use that pace, let him build it up and run through those gaps. But what are you seeing or not seeing from the rushing attack that the Seahawks are struggling with?
I haven't always looked at play calling as being, kind of a lingering question mark. Although I do agree with you that like Ken Walker isn't this bulldozer that's like, hey, hit the gap and go. Like he does like to bounce outside, like you said, and the idea of giving him a little more vision, a little more space. Is interesting. My co-host Michael Bumpus has pointed to play calling at times. Whether it's like just certain blocking schemes like zone versus if you're using power for something, and his take is that Zach Charbonnet and Ken Walker are good at two different things, and just like the very simple version, good at two different things, and that this offense does not always diversify to take advantage of those two in that way. It's kind of have like it'll be like this works for Ken, so plug Zach in for this sometimes, and it's like, well, wait a minute, like Charbonnet, like he's a bit more of a bulldozer. Like, you can do like some power stuff with him in a different way. So he's kind of explored that a little bit more in ways that are sometimes above my head, or sometimes where I'm like, well, I didn't catch it, so I'm gonna let you roll with this. My thing is that they just haven't had the offensive line play, the interior offensive line play. You've had a rotating door at center, and that's been a continuing issue for you. You've had questionable guard play. Damian Lewis has been up and down. I would say he's fine. I would say he's worth having as an investment piece for the future. And, your two tackles and Lewis, and then finding answers elsewhere. But the interior of their offensive line has been a giant question mark for multiple years. And I don't think it's a coincidence that your run game has also not been able to be consistent. Like you've got Lynch, huge gap, 2 years of Carson with 1,000 yards. And that was when you were running it more than anyone else. So, like, there were games when he had like 30 plus carries. So, of course, you're averaging 160 a game as a team that's kind of, your heavy run. And that's kind of it. And, you've had 1,000 yards of Ken Walker, which was obviously great, but like, I don't feel like that's the identity of this team. They want it to be, but like I don't feel like they're a run heavy team. I don't feel like they're a team that can pound the rock and run the ball really effectively. So last year it matters, it happened, but like I don't carry it over as like an era. Like I need to see more. So I've kind of just pinned it on offensive line play um and having two very different running backs that maybe you should bend a bit more with instead of trying a one size fits all solution for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you're totally right with the two running backs with the different sort of attributes, and
Yeah.
it's not a it's something that I like. You got your guy for long yardage. Wants to run, can run quickly, but don't give him a lot of outside runs where he probably be more effective with more open field. And then you got like Zach, and who's
Right.
there for the short, heavy yards. And yes, okay, you give him a few runs on the inside, but like you mentioned, the offensive line play probably hasn't been able to give him the gaps that he's wanted to.
Hmm.
Center, yeah, is a big issue. They haven't been able to settle on one. Hopefully now with either Ben Brown, who has played well this year, or with their rookie Oluwatimi, who hopefully
Hmm.
next season can get more snaps, because he looks like someone who can, take that position as his own for the next 5-6 years, which is what the Seahawks
Hopefully.
just need. They just need consistency in the middle
Yep.
of that offensive line for sure. But defensively, it's interesting. Obviously on the game on Sunday, they gave up 527 total yards. The team's given up an average of over 400 total yards in the last 7 games,
Mm.
and that on Sunday was the second game of those seven where they gave up over 500. I think the Niners were averaging a first down on every play, about 10.2 yards per play
Just a
on Sunday.
casual.
Just,
Yeah.
like you see
Casual
these stats, and
9.9 yards.
I, I was just
Yeah,
going through all this
it's
researching
ugly.
for the info. I was like, 9.9 yards a play. Are you
That's
kidding me?
unreal. That's like
Um,
bad college defense.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's weird because for the last 3 years, if I want to take in a smaller sample size, the the defense has obviously been an issue the last 3 years, but this year compared to those other two has been different in terms of the previous two. The defense started off like trash, and then towards the end of
Right.
the year, they got in quotes sorted out, and they thought,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we'll go into next season with this, everything will be fine. This season, differently, they thought they started off with, everything's working. Oh yeah, no one can run against us. We're doing great.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? 11 sack game against the Giants, and
Yep.
then, but
They
as
had
the
like a
season's
series
gone
of
on,
like 4 solid games right there.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and as the season's gone on, the defense has seemed to got worse, and especially for a side of the ball with so much money and draft capital invested into it, that we should be getting a lot better play from this. But we look at, say, tackling, for example. Tackling is a big problem. Each week, coaches and players say that tackling needs to improve for a team that has the tackling technique copied around the league. And I will admit, our team has used their hawk tackling technique,
Yeah.
and use their videos as guides for our own team of how to tackle. But how can a team for so many of almost a second year at the row, at least at this stage, be so bad at such a fundamental part of the game?
I have no idea. That is where I look at coaching, and that is where I wonder, like, if everyone is struggling with something, is that everyone, or is that a cause behind it? And so I don't know if it's things aren't being absorbed in practice. I don't know if it's a coaching thing. I don't know if it's a fundamentals thing. But when you have a heavily penalized team and a team that really, really struggles with tackles, I tend to think that's not 11 guys that are really bad. That's something that's not sinking in. It's interesting. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned like using that teach tape and stuff, because this used to be something that was just like fundamental with the Seahawks. And you were like, the one thing you can say is they really value the fundamentals of football, and that includes sure tackling. Pete Carroll has sounded very disappointed with it. He's talked about Woolen, for instance, Rick Woolen needing to improve there. And they, like the passes defense that he has for the percentage snaps that he's taken, but they're really struggling with the tackling. And he's called him out, and that's rare for him to call out players by name. He's talked about Darrell Taylor not finishing up a sack on Dak Prescott in the game against the Cowboys. It's rare to call out players, but I think that Pete's comments this week, whether it was on the Pete Carroll show on our airwaves, whether it was in his press conference, were very eye opening when it comes to defensive play. Because while people on the outside are looking at it going, hey, is this coaching? Like, why aren't people absorbing this? I think Pete, it seems to me, very confused and frustrated, because it sure seems like from his point of view, he's checking in during the week and it's, we got this, looks good, practice is solid. People are wrapping up, people are looking great, and the concepts are checking out. People understand, responsibilities, and they understand certain plays, and it's just not translating. And sometimes you're going to face an opponent. We talked with Frank Clark last week, and who coincidentally did not make this trip. He wasn't going to be active, but he talked about facing the 49ers a couple times. And he was like, when you face a team that is really good at something, it doesn't matter how good you are, they're going to be able to do it a few times. Like your best performance, like their worst game, they'll still be able to do something. The Eagles will be able to have a quarterback sneak against the Seahawks. The Seahawks could be the best team in football. It's just going to happen. Like when a team does something exceptionally well, you just have to accept they might do that against you. The trick is to not let that get in your head and keep playing sound. So, uh, uh, you know, to have some missed tackles against a really good offense is fine. That happens. to have as many as Seattle has been having and to have these fundamental issues, and worse still, to have your head coach be looking around like, what is happening? That to me is most unnerving, right? Like, the more confused and frustrated Pete Carroll seems, the more confused and frustrated I feel, because I'm wondering, like, hey, Pete, is this something where you need to ask yourself, like, clearly I'm not doing something, but what is it? Because it sure sounds like people seem to get it during the week and seem to look good during the week. So it's clear to me when you have this consistent issue that it's an internal problem. It's just, when is execution a coach problem? That's the question that I come back to with tackling.
Hmm. And yeah, and that could be down to, if you want to take it to the very beginning, like an assessment maybe issue when looking at these players as well. And it's interesting that you mentioned the Reek Woolen thing, because I think what game was it? Was it the Rams game he was taken out of? And he was
Oh God, it
benched.
was I want to say it was I want to say
Or
it
was it the
was it on the
Commanders?
road?
Yeah, it could have
I'm
been the
blanking.
Rams in
Yeah.
SoFi. Yeah, it
Yeah.
could have been the Rams in SoFi. But I think teams are actively targeting that side of the field and targeting him for his
Mhm.
lack of tackling. And
Yeah.
I've seen it myself. I've gotten hot myself watching it on the TV and seeing, one thing I hate more than anything else is those leading with the shoulder tackles. I just hate them.
Oh yeah.
I know it looks great if you're playing Madden with a hit stick and everything like that, but when I'm seeing it on a field, it
Yep.
does my head in. Just wrap up and just take to the ground. You can
Yeah.
get another tackle in or something and then celebrate. But um, it's interesting. Like you said, it'd be interesting to see what is done when it comes to, and I don't want to mean doom and gloom, saying at the end of the season, whether that is
Yeah.
in 4 games time, whether that's in 5 or 6 games time. But when they sit down and evaluate everything, and it comes to defense, saying, okay, so what is going on with these guys, and
Right.
why are they not tackling?
You're right. And maybe it's we talked about how sometimes coaching, isn't just one guy, it's like a soup, like ingredients in a soup. And like, it's clear that the coaching soup for the Seahawks has tons of positivity and fun and excitement and, really good at firing guys up. People love playing here. Like, even in down Seahawks years, when we've interviewed players or talked with them off record, have not heard bad things about playing here. Like, people genuinely enjoy playing here. Is there an accountability factor that's missing? Is there like a toughness? You know what I mean? Like, is there just one ingredient of this coaching soup? That's a horrible analogy, but it's one we were using this week because you got to have, you really do have to have like good cop, bad cop. I love the way that Bump explained it. And he was like, when I think of the best coaching staff that I was on, we didn't even win the most games, but we just had all the right pieces. And it was just a solid team because of that. And I wonder if maybe adapting for the Seahawks isn't firing Clint Hurt or moving on from Pete Carroll or Shane Waldron, but adding, or maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe shifting responsibilities, finding a place where maybe that accountability factor can be emphasized more.
Mm-hmm. And um, I, I'm going to bring up Shane Waldron a little bit, but I want to actually go back to Pete and look at the wider picture, because you're mentioning there about, the atmosphere and what the team is like. And this season I think we're seeing a little bit of a different type of Pete Carroll, and I don't
Mm,
know if it's totally in a good sense. I I am an avid listener to his Monday interview with Brock and Salk on Seattle Sports Radio. And you know during those losses, I hear a common theme that, oh, we didn't prepare properly for our opposition. And the players are not executing plays properly. He's
mm-hmm.
naming players as well. I think Julian Love and Jamal Adams this week were just two of the names that
Yep.
you mentioned. um do you find that maybe there's a disconnect in the locker room? Is Pete's message starting to fall possibly on deaf ears? He passed off that question with Salk on Monday.
Oh God.
And that
It
that
was
was
so
very
awkward.
awkward.
It was so
Very awkward.
awkward. We were listening
The
live, and both Curtis and I just went, "Oh." So God, but it was a fair question. I thought it was a completely fair
Yeah,
question. I'm glad that Mike asked it. I would not have been brave enough to, or I would have asked it in a way too soft way. But it
yeah,
needed to be asked, which is, hey, your whole thing is messaging. If your message is play tough, play sound defense, be aggressive, and your team doesn't look like that, well, it's fair to ask if the message is getting lost. Um, and I agree with you. It's been an interesting tone from Carroll this year. And Carroll, he's got an interesting side because you hear, you see Pete Carroll from afar and you're thinking he's everyone's, funny uncle. And like, like in a really, like, he's nice, he's jovial, he's friendly. Um, he's very sarcastic. He's the easiest coach. I have not covered many coaches, but by far the friendliest that I've ever had to like interview or whatever. But he has moments, and there is, I think, a uh, like savageness to Carroll that people saw earlier in his career. And I don't necessarily think that part is coming back, but maybe it needs to. KJ Wright on his show with G. Scott had a really interesting take about this, talking about how early on in Pete Carroll's career, and KJ might have talked about this with us as well, not us, our station, that if you weren't making it, you were cut, or if you weren't performing, you were benched. And Carroll was really tough with guys. I mean, he's supportive and he encourages guys to be themselves, but like he was not afraid for a very loyal person to say, "Hey, you need to prove it or you're out of here." And it was interesting to hear from a former player that there was a part to him that maybe we don't see as fans, that isn't as soft and kind, but is really cutthroat and pretty damn tough. And so I've wondered throughout these conversations this year if it's that Carroll there who's starting to get a little angry and starting to get a little frustrated and starting to say, or maybe even starting to sense, my job's going to be on the line, and I don't think this is my fault. And I think
yeah.
he puts himself in front of a lot of bullets for his team, and I've always admired that about him. And I don't think he's not doing that, but I do think that there is a version of Pete Carroll that I haven't seen a lot of, that we're seeing a little bit more this year, and it's very eye-opening.
Yeah, and I think you're right, definitely about the him looking at the scenario at the moment and thinking, "Oh, my job could be on the line." Because
Yeah.
I think, especially through these last four games, I've thought a lot about what he has said previously, and I go back to sorry, Russ's last season with the team, and when he was injured. He was out for about 3 or 4 games, and Gino came in and
Hmm.
covered. And Gino did a grand job, but I think it was the Monday night game in New Orleans. No, not in New Orleans, sorry, against New Orleans in Seattle.
Yeah.
And it was a very close game. I think it finished like 10-7 in the end to New Orleans. They won the game. Seattle, like their first play of the game, went for like a 75-yard touchdown to DK, and but he wasn't targeted for the rest of the game. Kind of coincides with last Sunday.
Hmm.
Great start, doesn't get. But his press conference after it, he came out of nowhere and he says that um, I've had Russ on this team and I've won a lot of football games with Russ. If I didn't have Russ, I wouldn't have won so many football games. I might not have been here as long. And I think I keep thinking about that and in that with that quote, with how things are going at the moment. He doesn't have a Russ anymore to sort of,
Yeah.
you know, make these plays out of nowhere, to keep the ball going, to make these fantastic to keep plays going, to sort of, sort of bail the team out when they're struggling. And I think, yeah, like you're saying, that it's kind of dawned on Pete as well this year that, yeah, we need to be a fully functioning team and not just rely on our quarterback now, because we don't have that sort of Russ at his peak anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And that feeling, I think that there's this natural thing when someone is eternally optimistic, as Pete is, to assume that person is naive. And there is no part of Pete Carroll, I think, that is naive. There's part of him that constantly believes and is incredibly optimistic and looks at the bright side very intentionally. But I think he's a very smart person, smarter than people give him credit for. I don't know if it's an age thing. I don't know if it's because he's uh, tries to portray this kind of, snarky, sometimes sarcastic look. But like, I think that Pete Carroll hears what people say. I think Pete Carroll is aware of conversations about the team. I think that Pete Carroll is uh, is aware that his job isn't safe just because he's won a Super Bowl, and that he doesn't think he's untouchable. And I think I think that if I'm putting myself in Pete Carroll's shoes, there's probably a lot that I wish people understood about the team. Like I kind of got a feeling of that during that interview that he had with Salk, and Mike was asking him about previous teams, and it's almost like you could hear Pete be frustrated about comparisons to the Legion of Boom, and he started to say, I'm paraphrasing, but what he said was basically offenses were different. Like 10 years ago, offenses were different. So anyone, like, he's not saying this, but I feel like he wanted to jump up from the interview and be like, anyone's thinking I'm just going to draft Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor and, whip up this like Legion of Boom defense, you're going to be waiting a long time, because like the league is just not the same. And the league has evolved to respond to the style of defense we played. And now we got to figure some other stuff out. And playing defense is harder and more complicated. And, there's probably parts of him too that's like, yeah, we thought Jamal would work out. When we drafted him, he was when we traded for him, he was a first team All-Pro, and he was 25 years old. It was a great trade for us on paper. Like, I think there's things he wishes he could say more bluntly that he can't. And that's how I would feel as a head coach. I'd be like, there's so much stuff you guys don't understand. That was a very long rant. But I just think Pete Carroll is way more aware of a lot of this stuff than we give him credit for. And I think I do wonder sometimes if there's a real fear, isn't the right word, but like, he's just so eternally hopeful, but like a real fear there of like, what if this costs me?
Yeah. I guess it's understandable, and it kind of has to be there as well, because like we said, we're in territory that he's never been in before with the team.
Yeah.
So he's going to he does have to sort of take a step back and evaluate everything and what he's doing with the team to see, like, is it me? Is there something else? Is it certain players? Do we need to change certain things? And one of the things that they may need to look at is the offensive coordinator. Because Shane Waldron has come in for a lot of criticism this year for his play calling, and look, I like Shane Waldron's play calling. So I think he's actually sort of evolved the offense in terms of making it more exciting to watch. Maybe there's an issue when it comes to Shane when it comes to situational play calling, that maybe he's a great play designer, but maybe not in situations he's a great play caller. But what do you get from your sense with the Seahawks? Is Shane sort of on borrowed time at the moment, and they may look to get someone else in the offseason?
I don't think at the moment. Salk talked about feeling after the interview that when Pete was hinting at changes or hinting at potential moves, that it was at a player level and not at a coach level. There have been moments over the course of the season where I have wondered if Pete is frustrated with Shane, though he's also been careful about talking about wanting to give coordinators that autonomy, like very intentionally not talking to Shane when Shane is calling plays and waiting until the defense is out there to go over there and talk to him. Like, I think that's from a place of respect and saying, this is your offense. I have my plan of what I want it to look like, but like, I hired you to do this job. And, but I think one of the things that's been weird about what Shane Waldron has done, I appreciate the way that the offense last year and this year has evolved with its use of tight ends. At the same time, it's almost like sometimes they don't know how to use all the weapons they have. And I don't necessarily think this is an offense that's like stacked with weapons, though I do think they have some good skill position groups. Like, I think your tight end group is really good, and I think your top 3 wide receivers are really good, and you've got running backs that can catch the ball. I'm surprised we don't use them more in the pass game. I guess screenplays are just constantly a failure, but I think there's been frustration that I've sensed of not being able to utilize all those weapons. Again, that's when we do this circular logic and we get back to, okay, well, is this an offensive line thing? Is this, you aren't using your tight ends as much because they're helping with pass blocking? Is this, that Gino's still figuring stuff out? Um, so I don't get the sense that I wondered if Shane might be on the move when the offense was looking abysmal. I think though that the defense is a little more under fire of late. Give up 500 plus yards to your divisional rival, like it's. I saw someone tweet, and I hate that I don't have credit for them right now. I just saw the tweet. They were like, if both coordinators are on the hot seat, it kind of feels like everyone should be on the hot seat because that's kind of a problem. But it's so hard to tell what the root of this is, right? Is it
Yeah.
is it that they haven't had the right players? Is it injuries? Is it bad luck? Is it, and I don't know that 4 games will give us enough time to find that out. And I'm curious to see these guys. This is going to piss people off, but I am curious to see this group of coaches for another year to see if it's maybe you do have the right ingredients and you just needed to be a little luckier with your schedule and injuries.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you're using the safety of an Irish podcast now to say that you want to keep those coaches there.
Well, I just for Clint Hurt, I think that the issue with the defense is overestimating. I think that was this
Mm-hmm.
team's cardinal sin with the defense. You overestimated how good you were as a defense. You overestimated how healthy Jamal would be and the difference he could make. You overestimated the development that Rick Woolen would have as a very new corner. You overestimated the kind of improvement that your outside linebackers would see with Darryl Taylor clearly not getting to that, like next level of his development. Uchenna Nwosu now being hurt for the season. Like, it just feels like part of the problem is you thought you had, more to cook with, and you don't.
Yeah.
With the offense, it's like you got so many pieces, like why aren't you using all of them? And so that one I'm still figuring out. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too soft on Clint Hurt. I do tend to think it's that I have more personnel questions when it comes to defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would sort of agree with you when it comes to defense. I think and Pete talks about it that the scheme and the setup is sound, but
Yeah,
player
it
execution is
is.
the issue. So yeah, I would agree. Maybe if you can move on some of the higher earners that maybe just aren't performing.
Mm-hmm.
I won't give names because people listen to this probably already know what sort of names that we're discussing, but maybe getting some, allocating funds to different areas instead of the positions that they do at the moment, and maybe going with the sort of cheaper guys.
Right.
One example though that I think of is, someone like Ryan Neal's only like $2 million with Tampa. They let him walk, and they just could have kept him no problem. And maybe I don't know, Jerry Reed, when he comes back from his injury, maybe he can step in there too. Which would be great. But Stacey, I know we've been talking so long. I've really enjoyed the chat. Thank you so much for taking all the time. One sort of last topic, and I will call it a day, and that's looking ahead now to the final 4 games of the season. Like I mentioned at the start, they're on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoffs. By the time they
Yep.
kick off against the Eagles on Monday, they could be 2 games out from the playoffs. Obviously, Monday night's game between the Packers and the Giants helped the Seahawks in that sense
Mm-hmm.
for playoffs. Of course they can still make it. You're in this horrible sort of limbo at the moment when it comes to the team where do we want to make it to the playoffs, be possibly one and done? Do we want to
Right.
sort of not make the playoffs, get a higher draft position? It's this horrible sort of what do we sort of do scenario. And obviously no team's going to voluntarily tank for a higher
Right.
draft position. But then they also have to take it into account saying, well, listen, if it is, let's say, a quarterback that they want, or if it is sort of a
Mm-hmm.
higher rated player in the first, or even, well, I was going to say second round. They don't have a second round pick this year, but in the other rounds that they're looking at, do we sort of look at and saying, well, look, maybe finishing 1-3 is not going to be the problem? But your sort of point of view on what the next 4 games and the approach is going to be like. Obviously, they still want to win, but
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe for the long-term aspirations.
I think long term, it's definitely better to win. I think there are people that would look at it and go, well, you could have pick number 12 if you lose out, or even higher. You're not going to get 5. But like you could get a solid pass rusher, right? Like you could get a really nice interior lineman. Like you could figure some stuff out at 10, 11, 12, 13 or whatever. I think though that if you are someone who uh, wants to keep the coaching staff or wants to keep Pete Carroll, if you are someone who doesn't like losing, or if you are someone who is in any way worried about culture, then it is in every interest of yours to keep winning. And I tend to fall into that latter category in particular because I think the only way the Seahawks close this gap and improve is to develop talent within the trenches, to improve in the trenches, and also to get the most as they possibly can out of their 2022-23 draft classes. I worry about the impact on young players when you lose the final, 6, 7, 8 games of the season. I worry about the impact of first and second year players when there is a lot of animosity in a locker room. It is so much harder than people realize to wash that away. Like I am continually in awe of what Dan Campbell has been able to do, taking over with Detroit and having like a pretty bad first kind of second year still before they kind of took off, because he kept those guys wanting to run through a wall for him. Like that is such impressive coaching, and it's so hard to do. That's why it deserves like a tip of the cap, because it's not that easy. And this idea that like you can hit pause on the season and not have real adverse effects on young players who you need if you want to be better. You need those guys. You need Devin Witherspoon to believe that this team is going to a Super Bowl. Like you need all of these young guys to think, I'm going to run through a wall for this team. Like that's the kind of environment you need. Thankfully, your schedule gets easier. I think that I would have loved, as would everyone, to have seen them pick up that win against the Rams. Maybe, squeak out a win against Dallas, and you'd feel a lot better about this, because the Eagles and 49ers were not the teams I felt most confident about. That said, Eagles have lost by a combined 43 points against the 49ers and Cowboys. You've lost by like 18 or 19 or so. The Eagles are a better team than you are, but they're in a way right now. Philadelphia is going to see Seattle as a get-right game, but I do think there's opportunity here, especially if Geno comes back, especially if you're just a little bit healthier. Guys like Ken Walker, maybe Jordan Brooks getting even healthier in this game. And then I feel like the remainder of your schedule are winnable contests. Like there is a world where you finish with 9 wins or more, and you enter an off season, yes, with a worse draft pick, but with a healthier culture. So depends on the trade-off you want to make. I tend to lean towards that one, but
yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, I think it was talked about that this isn't necessarily the year in the sort of building of the team that this was going to be the year to go for. So to keep morale as high as possible, to finish well is definitely important, and I would agree with that. And look, nobody wants to lose football games. We've gone through 4 of them already. I just want to get that win feeling back.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's so like you don't really, not you, but like it can be so damaging and so long lasting when there's that bad taste in your mouth. Like my first year covering the team in person was 2015. I covered the 2014 season, obviously, with the Super Bowl 49 loss, which was heartbreaking. And I used to talk with this one reporter who's no longer on the beat. One of his theories, and I loved this theory, was that 2015 on paper was one of the Seahawks' best seasons they've had. Like they were like a top 5 unit, I think, in like a total offense and defense. Maybe I'm spacing on the defense, but it was their last like really complete team. And his theory was always it was too late, because that locker room that season was fractured and those wounds run deep. And by now they've, those guys aren't there anymore, and it's changed and it's gotten better. But like, I think, there are humans playing, and you lose out to end a season. It doesn't matter if you trade up and get Caleb Williams and go spend on a big free agent. There's going to be distrust and there's going to be resentment, and that's hard to work through. So I'm hoping for their sake and for the sake for Seahawks fans, just for fun, that Monday's a surprise win, and then the rest of the schedule you get some good opportunities against comparatively weaker opponents.
Yeah, for sure. Stacey, it's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you. I'm so sorry if I kept you a little longer than maybe you initially planned.
Oh, that's okay. I'm long-winded.
Sorry. It's been great to get an insight into how the team's getting on from a Seattle point of view. Obviously, being over here, we only get to see so much, and we appreciate all the time that you spent covering the team. Hopefully, the next 4 games are going to go well, starting on Monday. I have a sneaking suspicion that it will. They just, I don't know why. I just think it's going to work out. But listen, for anyone that is interested in following you on any of your socials or following the show, where can they find it?
So you can find me on social at Stacy Rost, and on the show, it's seattlesports.com, 7:10 a.m., or the Seattle Sports app, and Bump and I are on from 10 to 2 Pacific. Just listen to the podcast. If you're in another country, the podcast is easy. It's just you don't even have to wake up early.
That's it. It's perfect,
Yeah.
and it's perfect time, was it? That's 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. to 10.
Yeah.
That's perfect time.
You get like a happy hour tune in.
Yeah. You're
Yeah,
either
my
just
day's
coming home
kind of
from work,
starting,
making
but
a bit of dinner,
yeah,
Seattle Sports
exactly.
Radio on in the background. It's perfect.
I'm
It's
getting into
perfect.
work with my coffee, but we're all kind of talking about the same thing.
Well, like I said, hopefully the next 4 games go well. Hopefully we will get to have you back on in the off season to discuss how it went and maybe looking ahead to the following year. But once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that is it for this edition of the show. Before you do, make sure if you haven't already on YouTube, you like this video and subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date with all the latest shows. The podcast version of this will also be available. Just search for Under Center Podcast wherever you get your podcasts at Under Center Pod, Instagram, Twitter, or X, wherever it's called. That's where you'll find us there. But until next time, stay safe and we'll see you soon.